So we're going to move into unstable channels and talk about some of the general channel responses to the instabilities. When we have an unstable channel, the downstreams where the change in local sediment supply is going to occur for sure. If we have the landslide or the gravel-rich tributary coming in, that's an increased supply to that channel, and we're going to end up somehow with some deposition downstream. That's an increased supply. The decreased supply, as for from a dam or a concrete or heavy stone lined channel, that actually results in downstream erosion. I have an example in Steuben County. After the '72 flood, they built a number of dams in Pennsylvania and a couple here in Steuben that were in the response from the 1972, 1975 floods that decimated the southern tier basically at that point in time. So they built those flood control structures to hold water and slow release them during storm events. Well, while you're doing that, they actually collect the sediment from the upstream areas in those structures, and they reduce the amount of sediment that's moving downstream so that the stream actually reacts in a more erosive manner downstream of those dams, believe it or not. We have the Tioga River that comes out of Pennsylvania that runs north to the city of Corning, and that stream, after a major rainstorm, runs at the top of bank for days after the heavy rains, because the dam's releasing it and won't release it high enough to go into the floodplain. So what happens with that extra flow for that many days, it saturates the banks, it picks up sediments because it's trying to slow down from the high water level, and it just creates a problem because it needs that sediment supply to slow itself down and create its channel. So instability progresses upstream where there's a change in local channel or a channel form. We're going to talk about the incised channels, which is a result in stream bed erosion and upstream and head cutting. That's basically if that dredging situation that Mike showed you is done in a stream, and the stream has to react to that. It has to create a head cut to pick up material to bring down to put into that that excavation area so that the channel can regrade itself, so it destabilize itself. That's an incised channel. It can't reach its floodplain. An A-graded channel is from a dam or an over-widening will result in deposition upstream. So it's just about the opposite. Incised channels. Streams that cannot access their floodplain at bank full are said to be incised. That means that at their bank full depth elevation, they can't get out into a floodplain any longer. Therefore, their velocities and the erosiveness is increased, and much so increased during a flooding event, which creates more instability on the channel itself because of the incision and the fact that it cannot access its bank full floodplain. So incised streams then are almost always unstable and very difficult to stabilize.
Yep, Jeff, and if you don't mind me jumping in here,
go right ahead, Mike.
Yep, we need to look at the type of stream that we're observing when we go in there to evaluate it, because different streams are are engage their floodplain differently. So again, we need to take that into consideration when we're looking at incision.
Very good. Here's a slide of a incised channel after a storm event. You can see the steepness of it, the narrowness of it. You look at the top of banks here, how high they are. This has got to be a guy that's almost 6 foot. So he's probably what, I don't know, 12 foot in the ground there. That stream will never be able to reach up and out. So what happens in the incised channel is they dig themselves down deeper. The banks start caving in. The channel's trying to widen itself so it can build an internal floodplain again. So these actually end up as being old floodplain terraces in the future, with the new floodplain being developed naturally down lower. So head cut definition, that's just instability that progresses upstream, and downstream is where you get the deposition occurring. Generally, it's from that local disturbance, either natural disturbance or man-made. You can see in the slide, we get the gravel deposition downstream. We're getting the stream head cutting as it migrates upstream, so it's picking up that material and depositing downstream. Here's another example of a head cut. The head cut is here. We're in that, Mike had this slide up before showing the incised channel. You can see how a activity downstream has created this channel to want to migrate upstream, similar to those stream table videos that we saw earlier. It's picking up this material, and it's trying to deposit it downstream to fill in that hole so it can reestablish that channel's normal slope. And these head cuts can go on for very long distances until they hit an area where they cannot migrate any further, either via a stream culvert crossing or a bridge abutment stabilization measure, or a bedrock situation where it stops the head cut. Another example of a stream here that was inundated with excess gravel deposition. You can see how stable the channel is upstream, and I'm not sure what happened in this slide, but there must have been material that moved through this reach and deposited down here, either maybe because of a debris jam or just because there was so much material and the peak flow stopped and it deposited it here, and the stream is reacting to that deposition. It's probably actually changing course. It probably went this direction at one time. It's changing course. It's trying to head cut itself back up into the more stable section there. The reason I say that is because this looks like a well casing to me. So I'm thinking the stream didn't used to run here. Probably was over in this direction someplace. So we have a stream table video of a head cut. Then you can see that this table's set up so that we have it on a slope and the water's flowing in this direction. And if we have some activity occur downstream, you can see how the profile begins to change as it picks up material, try to fill that hole in. The stream tries to regrade itself, head cutting and filling, head cutting and filling, head cutting and filling. So that's the profile, but as that stream head cuts and refills itself downstream, then not only is the bed of the stream being affected, but these banks are also being affected. They're caving in because of the drop in elevation. Here's another head cut. This one is the scenario is another activity downstream, a dredge or something. Notice we have a pond over here in the aquifer. That head cut just moved up through this channel here. Notice how it got it cut itself down below groundwater, and it got to an elevation where it actually dried up that wetland scenario, and is now just going crazy with destabilization and erosion. Avulsions. So the definition of avulsions is where the stream is no longer in its original channel. So that means that we had a situation occur that caused a deposition, which relocated the channel to a different spot within that watershed. We have to look at whether it's is it a threat to water quality? Is it a threat to property? Sometimes these avulsions can actually be a better alignment for the channel than was originally there. So these are some things to look at. When you're working with avulsions, there's no need to go in there and do anything immediately, like go in and try to dig it out, dredge it out. If there is no property or infrastructure that is in danger. The note here says that we need to notify the municipality or the local soil water district that there's an avulsion there, so we can make the proper decision on how to handle it. So we do work on avulsions if the property or infrastructure is in danger. We're asking soil waters or New York State DEC office for assistance. If the repairs got to be made immediately, we're bringing the new bank up to the same elevation as the existing ground, which means that, so we can get that channel to access the floodplain in the future. We don't want to bring it, we don't want to get it so deep that we're creating a incision again. Armor it with large rocks if there's some available. Again, notify the DEC or soil water conservation districts of repairs immediately. Generally speaking, those types of repairs are going to have to be monitored so that we can make a decision on how to stabilize that area in the future, or whether there should be a change in that project. Here's an example of an avulsion in Delaware County, 2009. If you look here where my arrow is, the stream used to run the course back here along the mountain or the hillside and outlet right in here. What had happened during the storm event is that deposition occurred right here in the old channel, and it forced a new channel to head down the valley in this direction to meet up with the old channel again here. So we got extensive erosion here, down here by this riparian buffer area. This is actually a barn, and I think the stream itself was running right next to the barn foundation. So definitely, and we have a road here. So there's definitely need to do something and an attempt to probably try to get it back into its original channel. Also, the original channel probably has a better water quality benefit because it's a fairly wooded area. It's got a good buffer on both sides. It's probably a lot stabler in this reach here than it is out in the middle of this old pasture or crop field. And this is what they did. Notice it's 2011, so this is a couple years after the issue was created. A plan was put together where they actually blocked off the new channel that was developed by the avulsion, cleaned the avulsion out, and basically probably didn't have to do anything down through here, just let it run down through the original channel. So they protected the barn, the road, and they stopped the erosion or head cut that might have been coming up this valley. This is the Westbrook avulsion. Again, Delaware County. We got below a state highway. This is kind of looks more like a pasture scenario to me, or hay fields at one time. You can see how we have an avulsion here that has been created, and now it's moved downstream. Appears that the old channel used to be up here higher in the landscape. When the avulsion happened, it moved it down the hill somewhat. But we have multi-braided channels and things are spreading out all over the place. So they wanted to, I think this was a part of this experiment to figure out how to deal with avulsions, because it was kind of a low priority area, low liability area. So this is a good experiment project. So they went in and they removed took the channel and redesigned the channel for proper flows, got it all into one line, one main stem, and cut off the old channel that ran up higher in elevation. So this is a few years after the project was done, and you can see how the channel's formed its own point bars, it's formed its own meander patterns, relatively stable now without a lot of erosion happening on those banks. Okay, we're going to move into flood response. So basically, this is the emergency stream intervention program. So a lot of this program came out of flood responses in the past, where contractors and municipalities were rushing into projects without really knowing what to do with the channel or how to handle it, or just go in and wholesale clean some areas. This program is assisting in coming up with a new process to deal with such situations in the future. So when we have a flood response, we need to prioritize a lot of the items that we need to address. So we figure out a higher priority stuff, we figure out the higher priority damages, we do an assessment, and we can go in and do a repair and document whatever is needed in the future for repairs. During an emergency, we're just trying to do the immediate stuff first, the stuff where facilities or infrastructures or roads or bridges or culverts or anything to allow or prevent the loss of life and to protect the general public. That's what we're looking at immediately when we get into the first flood response. So right after a flood, what do we need to do? We certainly need to open up clogged culverts, open closed roads. We need to keep those important installations functioning, such as the power systems, power plants, fire stations, hospitals, water well systems for sure, sewage treatment plants, and that sort of thing. So they're more of the high priority items that we need to look at. For example, here, of course, this is an emergency observation. This bridge has pretty much been decimated by the flood, probably plugged with debris and water run over the road and washed out the entire structure. So basically, this structure is going to take a little bit more design and a little bit more efforts to get the road back open again. So in an emergency situation, this is probably where you're looking at emergency right away, is to get road closures done and that sort of thing, so you can come up with a plan on how to address the future repairs of this site. So high priority items, the items necessary for the first part of the cleanup process. Like I said, this course concentrates on getting channels back into some acceptable condition. Something that we can live with, something that doesn't damage the stream system, both upstream and downstream. We just need to open up those clogged channels from debris and that sort of thing. We need to get those channels back into place, stabilize the active eroding stream banks, and see if we need to work on stabilizing any landslides that occurred. Need to get the channel to a condition so that the natural processes of stream morphology can begin to return it to its natural state. We don't want to over excavate, we don't want to over dredge. We want to do it in a means where we can allow that stream to heal itself up in the future. So, need access to stream channels. We need to decide where we're going to work first, what we're going to do. We need to figure out the equipment or the workforce that's going to be needed to get that project done. And we need to identify reaches that are going to acquire some technical assistance, either through the Soil and Water Conservation Districts or DEC or some other agency. So we need to work on actively eroding high banks, eroded banks that are head cutting towards infrastructures or home. We need to look at areas where we have a high sedimentation load, where other small floods might cause an issue or make the bank even worse or impact the infrastructure. Basically, channel blockages, debris at culverts, revetment, undermining, impaired channel capacity so that a lesser stream flow with a flooding issue would be worse. So here's a slide showing an actively eroding bank. If we have a bank that's close to a garage but there doesn't seem to be any, I'm not sure where the house is, probably downstream towards past that tree that we see on the right. But is there immediate danger of this creating damage to infrastructure or life and limb? And by the looks of the size of that stream system and the type of material that's in that bank, it's probably it's an active eroding area, and it needs to be addressed. But I think this one's going to take a little more time than just going in and opening up a channel or taking out a clog or a debris jam. So this one's going to take some design work and some serious calculations, and it's going to cost some money to repair this one. Channel blockages. This is a good example of a debris jam that has created a deposition load just upstream. Definitely could cause problems and reroute this stream if the deposition isn't removed in a timely manner. And we have to remember that when we go in to do these things, we have to try to get that channel back to some sort of a stable slope. We have to take some survey information to figure out where we need to excavate to and not get overzealous with it. But sometimes these areas here will actually heal themselves up if you just get the debris out of the way.
Jeff, again, if you don't mind me jumping in here, on a site like this, one of the things that you want to consider is all that sediment that's behind that blockage that we see in the channel here. And sometimes if we, what's going to happen, we need to consider is if we remove that woody blockage and then all that sediment flows downstream and then causes some problems downstream. And the other thing that you might want to consider is sometimes that woody blockage is an enhancement because it starts to get to that incision of that channel. It starts to block sediment up, so the channel above that blockage is re-engaged with the floodplain. So you need to look at some of these situations carefully and not just jump in there and start ripping and tearing because again you think it needs to be done.
It's a good point, Mike, because I know I've had tough decisions on some of the debris that we've taken out of streams. This case here is because you have that much sediment buildup behind it, it does make you think twice about taking it all out and basically incising that channel while you're doing the work. And disconnecting it from its floodplain. So very good point. So a little more evaluation probably needs to be done when you're looking at some of these. Thanks for the comments, Mike.
Yep. And especially in an area like this where it doesn't look like there's a lot of development, that's going on, and a lot of structures being impacted.
Excellent. Debris at culverts. There's a scenario of the plug culvert with debris. We got some issues. There's the town road there. We got quite a bit of damage on the infrastructure. So we're going to get this channel opened up so that we can get the flows going through again. This is definitely an area where that's probably a high priority for the township. Under mine revetments, this is an example of some riprap that was stuck on, placed on the bank, and after the storm event, it evidently cut itself down deeper and undercut the toe of that stone that was put in, and it just slid down the bank a little bit. Whether or not this is an immediate emergency is to be seen, but this is some of the issues that you have to document, because you will have to probably make repairs to something like this in the future. Impaired channel, deposition in a channel. It looks like there was quite a bit of debris that got packed up in this channel and created deposition in this area here, which basically filled the channel in, so that anytime we get a smaller storm event, this floodplain is going to be probably activated at a lesser storm, and it's going to create some problems downstream. But you can notice how this floodplain has collected quite a bit of fine material, so we know that the velocities must have been quite low down through here at the time of the flood. They just need to get the channel reconnected through that reach there. So where not to work? Okay, the channel's dimensions seem to be okay, and there's little damage around. We don't need to be messing around with that. If the banks are relatively stable, we don't need to be putting that on a high priority list. If the channel bottom's imbricated, imbrication is the nature's way of packing the gravel in a shingled manner, which is probably very, very little erosive, because it's packed in there by Mother Nature. It takes a lot of energy to move that. Once we start moving that around, we loosen up that natural imbrication, and then that material in the future will mobilize itself at a much quicker or lesser velocity rate. It'll mobilize. Here's a photo showing after a storm event how that material is laid in there by Mother Nature. That's caused by the velocity of the water. And the stones, as you can see, are wedged together like shingles. And basically that material in there in that channel right now is less mobile than you could make with doing any construction or using any equipment in. So once we rearrange the bed and banks, we loosen that material up. All that shingled larger stone that was on the surface is now kind of disappeared, and the fines have come up into it. This material is much more transportable than was the slide before, when it was all imbricated by Mother Nature. Caution has to be led to those steep streams. Slopes are over 4%. The stream's probably one of those step pool systems that we showed you earlier in the program, where the channel itself has steps in it, like mini natural check dams, to help stabilize itself. If we remove those areas, we're going to ask for trouble and definitely have some serious head cutting. And we could actually start destabling banks if we do the wrong thing on those steep streams. the slope's 2 to 4%, it's probably a step pool type system. And we just need to know that there's different ways of dealing with that stream system than there is with the pool riffle system. So in this steep stream, if the debris jam is there, we need just to remove the debris jam, not to be removing any gravel or stones or anything like that, unless we absolutely have to. Generally in those streams, you won't see a lot of gravel deposition unless it's a huge debris jam. So we have some slides here asking the question, would you work here? So down, you can take a look at that channel and where we're actually located and where the infrastructure is. And we have a road way up here. Yeah, we have I don't know, this could have been a small landslide up here in this area, and looks like we had a small landslide down in this area here. However, we're still quite a ways from that road system. The stream has a relatively single drainage pattern or meander pattern up through here. Its width looks pretty good. These banks here is when it was flooding, it was activating these areas here as floodplain, and they're still there. So I'm not so sure if I would actually be doing any work in here immediately. Where would you work here? Again, if it's a single channel, we got some meanders, the banks aren't too bad. Actually, it's hard to tell from this photo, but it almost looks like somebody's already worked in here. But upstream here is where there might be some channel capacity problems. It's hard to tell. So if we have stable banks again, if we've got some meander and we got that single channel, then somebody should be reevaluating it to determine whether or not we need to go in and start removing excess, what we think might be excess materials. So this is what they did. This was that one downstream landslide. Go back to that landslide, get right in here. I think this is what we're looking at after they did that channel work. You notice how these trees are laying down here at the toe of the slope. These are actually offering some stream bank protection right now, and probably will slow down the erosion on that steep embankment. You can also see it looks like we have woody debris and trees packed in along this bank. It might naturally heal up itself. So sometimes it's just best to leave them there. So they went in and they rechannelized this whole thing. You can see there's no longer any imbrications. We don't really have any floodplain benches or floodplain left. They probably actually lowered the stream bed channel so that the stream's going to have a harder time accessing any floodplains. And this material now along all these banks is more mobile, going to be more mobilized because of velocities than it would have been in the future if they hadn't bulldozed it as like a diversion ditch here or something. So the lack of floodplain is going to cause a stream to build one to maintain its natural functions. And that's what it's doing. So for 2 months after the work was done, and you can see how the channel is beginning to meander, re-meander itself. It's trying to build point bars for in-channel floodplain, and it's probably head cutting itself upstream. There's another slide of the same thing. You can see how the stream is trying to form its internal floodplains by creating point bars here. Once these point bars reach a certain elevation, they will act as flood relief for the channel in the future. So you can see how the stream wants to get back over to where it was originally. There's where the toe of that landslide was, or failure. it's going to continue to move in that direction until it gets back to its natural meander pattern. This is only 4 months after the work was done. Now we're 18 months after the work was done. You can see how now the stream is getting itself. I mean, this bank's looking pretty good. It's not being severely eroded. It's starting to get some step pool riffles put back in with the point bars. So it's actually putting itself back to where it was right after the storm by the looks of it. So all that effort and work with all that bulldozing, really, if we had left it alone for a little longer, let's see what the channel would have done. We could have made some better decisions and made some efforts to do something a little different. So that was the downstream adjustment. According to this slide, has made a head cut that came upstream. So you can see how the head cut has working its way up the channel, and that's going to destabilize these banks over here because it's probably getting deeper than it was originally, and we just need to be very careful on slope on these streams when we're working in them. So the stream continues to lower its bed so it can get back to a stable slope again, and you can see that we're looking at almost 6 feet scour along the toe of this stream bank here from the activities that we did from channel straightening downstream. This material, once it's mobilized and it moves itself downstream, it actually probably is plugging culverts and bridges downstream or depositing somewhere downstream and causing problems. So post-flood work. Improper post-flood work can negatively affect the stream function, the stream stability, of course, the aquatic habitat, and that goes right along with the water quality, habitat, water quality. And it costs a lot of money for the local resources to keep going in and maintaining structures that are downstream that may be impacted from this activity. So that's something we need to look for. And then we have to address the situation with, well, what do we do in the future? Do we need to do future repairs so that we can slow down the erosion now that we have to deal with? So it can get quite costly if we don't do the proper immediate flood work. So an itemization sheet was developed by Delaware County Soil and Water Conservation District, and we have a training manual, and we'll bring that slide up, basically to help us document the information from the field so that we can prioritize it when we get it back to the office or whatever. We're using one sheet for each stream reach. We're checking off the problems, adding notes, doing a sketch. We can change this information if we need to, and for sure, we need to take photos at all of these sites, right directly after the emergency has occurred, because they're going to help us with the permitting. They're going to help us make decisions on where to work, where not to work, that sort of thing. It'll assist the municipality greatly. So the advantages are we can identify the location, the number, the different types of problems that we have on each reach. We can, like I said, it can help us decide which is the most severely impacted reaches so that we can make decisions on where to prioritize our work in the near future. And then we can determine the manpower that's needed for the job, whether it's removing woody debris and we need chainsaws and laborers, and what type of equipment needs we need to have out there, whether it's excavators or front end loaders or trucks to haul debris away. We can always revise our priorities as we move through the assessment process all the way to. Again, these sheets can be saved as a record to document what work was done just in case we're looking at maybe a FEMA disaster where we could be receiving state or federal reimbursements for some of the work that we had completed. Generally, most of those disaster declarations do not occur for many, many weeks or even months after the disaster has occurred. That's why it's good to have this as a record. And then you can document this stuff for permitting reasons too, for the permit applications if needed. And, or if it's an emergency permit, then you've got that documentation already established. Here's an example of the Platte Kill site that we looked at the avulsion that occurred, and they quickly put together a sketch plan of what they were going to do, and change the avulsion so that they could put it back in the old channel. They had debris at culverts, and they had scour at the culvert. They had a mass failure, avulsion. We know they had the avulsion that occurred. So all this stuff was documented. Documented gravel deposits. They got an estimated height and length of what the deposition was in the sketch plan. So again, before and after photos, very, very important. Description of the work that was completed needs to be written up. Of course, you need to take time and write down the days you worked, the time you worked, the type of equipment, the material, your labor force. So all that stuff can be figured out for a cost in the future. Post-construction review, we need to go back and look at it and see if the work was performed properly, especially if we had a permit involved, if it was completed, if it needed the needs of the identified projects on the itemization sheets. And you can always contact the Saltwater District and New York State DEC offices for assistance with future vegetation, structures, and long-term monitoring of those sites if need be.
Jeff, yeah, if I could, just
Mike.
Yep, just a reinforcement of that itemization sheet or that site sheet. I know I've worked with a lot of different agencies, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, FEMA, state agencies, yep. Really, it doesn't hurt at some point to get together with all of those folks and everybody collecting that same information, because I know in times of a flood or times of emergency, everybody scrambled to every different direction, and there's people crossing each other's path. And so if everyone's collecting that same information and that information can be shared, that's a real advantage and a real work saver. So that's worth putting some thought into.
Definitely. Especially the thing we run into was making sure the highway departments and the highway superintendent knew how important it was to get out there and take photos. And the photos and that documentation helped quite a bit when it came to the time when we had to deal with the federal aid and the state aid, and like you said, the NRCS's programs too. So,
and I know I've been out on floods, where a lot of work was done, and sometimes for whatever reason, depending on the extent of the flood, the FEMA folks don't show up for a year later, and they ask, okay, what kind of costs do you have? And I don't know, I don't have any of those records, because you're just working to get things done.
You're just trying to get things done. You're just trying to get all the as much done as possible in a day so you can get the public back on the roads again. I know it's a challenge, but it pays off when you can document stuff like that on those sheets.
And I believe we heard stories that what was the estimate of how many for the regulatory agencies to come down and sit down with the municipality and go over all their sites, and if they had good documents, they had good photos, they didn't need to go visit every site, they could write emergency permits to go out there and do some of those activities. And wasn't there estimates of nearly 80 sites being approved in one day?
Yeah.
That we heard?
I remember myself doing emergency permits on certain sites, and we were allowed at that time to do the permits right on site. And I remember doing like 27 myself in one day. So, because I had the photos and I had the drawings and the documentation that I could staple all together and submit them at a later date. So, wonderful.